The billionaire sat in handcuffs that bit like old debts, and the room hummed with fluorescent judgment. A child stood beyond the glass and clutched a fox plush as if it could translate fear. The billionaire said, "I'm sorry," and the cuff chain twitched like a startled vein. A screen in the corner glared with his face beneath the word Empire, and Rain tapped code on the window. The guard shifted, keys ticked, and the child raised her palm to the glass as if blessing a prisoner. A voice that sounded like gravity said, "He built an empire, but he couldn't save her." The billionaire stared at the floor, and guilt spilled through him like cold light. A storm climbed the skyline, and the tower outside wore tears as architecture. The child's breath fogged the pain, and a small heart drew itself in vapor and vanished. The guard looked away as if privacy could be faked, and the clock swallowed a second. The billionaire said, "Please," and the word sank like a coin into dark water. The child whispered nothing, and silence delivered the sentence that paper never could. Cameras screamed like gulls above a stormed harbor as the van doors slid, and he stepped into wet light. Reporters surged, and umbrellas collided like shields in a clumsy war. A journalist said, "Is it true you stole the company from your own blood?" He blinked, and the flash burned an afterimage shaped like a promise he once kept. He said, "No comment," and the syllables felt like thread tearing from a sweater he could not mend. A siren moaned farther down the block, and the city watched with 1,000 unblinking eyes. The child's face crossed his mind, small as a candle seen from a freeway at night. Another voice said, "Do you regret the vote?" And shoes sloshed through a river made of weather and rumor. He lifted his wrists, hid the cuffs with the edge of his coat, and found his mouth heavy with rust. A boom mic grazed his cheek, gentle as accusation, and a headline formed in midair without mercy. He said, "Let the facts speak," and Rain said more. The courthouse steps rose like a stage, and the world demanded a confession he could not yet name. The glass tower held him like a museum exhibit, and the night pressed its face to the panes. A magazine cover looped on the lobby screens, his smile preserved in preservatives. He shut the office door, and the hush rang louder than applause, louder than money. He said, "I won," and the word tasted like ash that remembered being wood. A single lamp carved a small planet of light on his desk, and he tried to breathe there. He said, "I built this," and the room did not care, and the skyline did not bow. His eyes burned, and then water found gravity, and a quiet sob unstitched him without spectacle. The voice that sounded like gravity returned and said, "He built an empire, but he couldn't save her." He folded over the chair's edge and pressed his forehead to his fists, as if prayer could be reverse-engineered. Outside, the storm smeared neon into bruises, and the tower wore them without complaint. He said, "I will fix it," and the city answered with thunder that did not negotiate. The lamp flickered once, like a heartbeat deciding whether to continue, and chose work over mercy. In a polished corridor that smelled of lemon and ambition, a crayon drawing lay face down. He paused, and the paper lifted at a corner in the air from the AC, like it wanted to be seen. A janitor said, dropped something, and kept mopping as if the floor were a rumor. He said, "Not mine," and still he bent, because some gravity cannot be argued. The drawing showed a tower, a man with a briefcase, a child with a fox, and a heart cracked down the middle. He said, "Who left this?" But the corridor only answered in air vents. The janitor said, "Kids tore upstairs and pushed the bucket along, wheels talking to tile." He held the picture by its edges like a forensic tech, trying not to smudge the past. The cuffs kissed his sleeves when he straightened, and the sound was a secret hinge. He whispered, "I'm sorry," to the paper, and the heart looked like a door he could not open. A lift chimed down the hall, and the minute stepped forward without him. He slid the drawing into his jacket, and it burned there with a heat no science explains. Some debts follow even when you walk faster. A pen hovered above a line that looked like a cliff edge, and his hand shook. Paper was crisp enough to cut, and the ink waited like a quiet river. The guard said, "Initial here," and tapped the margin with a nail that had seen too much. He said, I built this to keep a promise, and the room checked its watch. The guard said, to who? And the question paced his ribs like a trapped thing. He said, to a child I used to be, and the cuff chain chimed like a cheap bell. The dot of ink fell, spread, and became a map of a country where regret pays taxes. Somewhere above them, thunder rehearsed its verdict, and the tower listened like a judge. He signed, and the signature looked expensive and worthless at once. He said, "This is not surrender." And the guard said nothing because facts were louder. The elevator doors parted, a mouth ready to swallow meetings, and the world reset its mask. He put the pen down with a tremor he could not bill to anyone, and the page glowed with consequence. The child's drawing warmed his chest like contraband fire. He stepped toward the lift, and the future waited with the patience of ice. The store smelled like dust and burned plastic, and the clock stuttered above a closed sign. Alex sat on a cracked vinyl bench while his mother pleaded behind a thin door. Evelyn said, "Please, I can learn the register, I can work nights." Mike curled beside him, 7 and trusting, and said, "Does he like us?" Alex said, "He will," and held his brother's hand like a vow. The manager's voice arrived flat, like freezers humming in winter. He said, "We have no openings, and no training budget, sorry." A fluorescent flickered, and the bench squeaked like a weak excuse. Evelyn stepped out wearing a smile that meant nothing survived inside it. She said, "We will try another place," and her keys shook. Alex watched her hands and measured the tremor he would erase. He said, "I will build something so you never have to ask again." Mike said, "You don't have to," and looked proud and scared at once. The door side closed, and the closed sign stayed honest. Rain began, soft as a warning that wanted to become a storm. Night made a one-room apartment feel like a ship on black water, and dinner was 4/4 of stale bread. Evelyn said, "Tomorrow will be brighter," and her smile held with pins. Mike measured his quota with careful eyes, and slid crumbs to Alex. Alex said, "We split even," and cut again, as if fairness could conjure more. A siren went by, slow as an old promise. The bulb buzzed, and grease on the pan shone like a small moon. Mike said, "What if we plant money and water it?" and grinned. Alex said, "We plant work, and it grows into doors," and tried to make it sound easy. Evelyn touched their hair like she was counting blessings that changed value hourly. The windows sweated, and the calendar picture curled at the corner. Alex whispered, "One day we will own the lights on this street." Mike said, "I will draw the logo," and lifted a pencil like a flag. The bread tasted like resolve, and the sink dripped seconds they could not spend. Outside, rain trained the city to listen. Morning brought fists that knocked like debt, and silence did the math. A man who used to be their father leaned in the hallway with promises rolled thin as cigarettes. Daniel said, "I'll fix it," and wouldn't meet their eyes. Evelyn said, "Go," and kept her voice wrapped in thread. Mike pressed behind Alex as if shadow could save him. Alex said, "We don't owe you," and found the shape of a future in the words. The collector said, "Final notice," and slid paper under the door like a blade. Daniel muttered, "They're kids," and tried to stand taller than the truth. The stairwell smelled like bleach and surrender. Evelyn said, "You're both mine," and the word "mine" felt like a flag on a small brave hill. Mike said, "We can sell the old radio," and Hope wagged a tired tail. Alex touched the paper and felt a heat that wasn't fire. He said, "I will make something that cannot be repossessed." The door clicked shut, and the corridor kept every echo. Years stepped forward, and glass replaced plaster, and Alex wore a borrowed shirt that folded wrong at the wrists. He stood outside a conference room where suits laughed past him like traffic. The receptionist said, "We're not taking interns today." Alex said, "Your email said to return this morning." She said, "Things change," and her smile left a receipt. Mike waited by the elevator with a sketchbook closed like a secret. He said, "We can teach ourselves," and tapped the spine. Alex looked at his reflection and saw a door pretending to be a wall. He said, "I will build a lobby that never says no." A partner passed, scanned the badge that was not his, and forgot him. The city hung beyond the windows like a prize he would win by inches. The clock on the glass ticked in quiet, accurate contempt. Alex set his jaw and filed the moment under fuel. Hope learned to stand on one leg and still look tall. The cafe smelled like oranges and ambition, and Alex pitched an app to a man whose watch had more presence than his eyes. The investor said cute and typed while not reading. Mike angled the laptop so the demo glowed like a sunrise. Alex said, "It fixes a choke point no one sees yet." The investor said, "If it mattered, I'd already have it." Mike whispered, "We can ship a prototype in 2 weeks." Alex said one, and let the math dare him. Steam rose from cups like small ghosts of better choices. Wow. The street outside moved with people who believed in lunch. The investor closed the folder and opened a door to nowhere. He said, "Come back when you have traction." Alex smiled, the way a blade introduces itself to a stone. Mike said, "We will," and meant it more than the man could measure. The cafe bell jingled, and the day kept walking. The demo kept breathing on its own. The table wobbled like a dock in rough water, and the code pulsed like tide under a moon. Alex said, 3 more hours, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mike said, "You said that 3 hours ago," and grinned without joy. Empty cans stood like a skyline built by caffeine and denial. A calendar on the wall still wore last month's birthday with an untouched candle. Alex said, "We launch or we drown," and the keys clacked like oars. Mike said, "We can miss the party, but not the bug," and pushed another bill. The room smelled like hot plastic and ambition with a limp. Outside, dawn turned the window into a dull mirror that judged them fairly. Alex said, "One more feature," and the night rolled its eyes. Mike said, "One more test," and the progress bar crawled like penance. Success felt close enough to hear breathing, but not close enough to touch. The candle stood at attention in Claire's kitchen, and the wick learned patience badly. Claire said dinner at 7 to the empty chair, and poured wine that forgave nothing. Her phone lit twice and apologized with silence. Alex said, "I am 10 minutes away," to a voicemail that would not answer. The pasta exhaled steam like a ghost rehearsing regret. Claire said, "Call me when you are human," and set the plate aside like a fainted hope. She turned the record over and let a slow song do the speaking. The clock smiled with teeth. Alex said, "I am building a life for us," to a room filled with late receipts. Claire said, "You are building a life without me," and pinched the bridge of her nose to stop a tide. The candle folded into a small white ruin that looked like a monument to effort. The chair kept its promise and stayed empty. Funding arrived in emails that sounded like applause heard through a wall. Alex said, "We did it," and the word landed without a place to sit. Mike said, "We should sleep," and laughed like a hinge that needed oil. The logo went up on a rented floor, and the city learned their name. Reporters said, "How does it feel?" And microphones bloomed like flowers in winter. Alex said, "Grateful," and meant exhausted. Wins stacked like trophies that did not know how to glow. Mike said, "At what cost?" and the question found a chair. A celebration cake sagged on a counter under too much light. Alex said, "One more acquisition," and stared at the map like it owed him peace. The night returned with work in its pockets, and they took it. The office hummed, and success hummed louder, and neither sang a melody. The cardiology room held its breath and asked them to match it. Grace sat small on the bed with a fox plush that understood more than plushes should. The monitor blinked a language Alex wished to buy and could not. The doctor said, "We have options," and kept her voice soft enough to carry heavy news. Grace said, "Is the fox brave?" and touched its worn ear. Alex said, "Braver than me," and felt the ground rearrange its rules. Claire stood steady, her hand on Grace's shoulder, steady as tide. The clipboard waited like a gate with a price. Alex said, "What will it take?" and did not mean money alone. The doctor said, "Time," and wrote down a number that felt like a mountain. Grace said, "Can I still draw at home?" And the room softened around the question. Alex said, "Yes," and signed forms that sounded like thunder in his chest. Cassian Vale entered the summit like weather that had studied men for sport. Cassian said, "Your margins are a mirage," and smiled with teeth trained for committees. Alex said, "Then walk through," and kept his pulse on a short leash. Cameras blinked like gossip. Mike said, "He is baiting you," and tapped a number that refused to lie. Cassian said, "I prefer to watch men drown," and the room laughed as if cruelty were culture. Alex said, "We do not drown," and felt the floor tilt anyway. Slides changed with a bright cold click that echoed like a small verdict. A headline hovered ready to choose a hero and a villain by lunch. Mike said, "Stay on product," and the deck obeyed. Cassian said, "Markets punish sentiment," and the clock agreed. Alex said, "Markets reward execution," and pressed advance as if pushing a tide. The applause at the end was polite and sharp like new cutlery. The boardroom smelled of chilled air and risk. Briefcases clicked open, spilling graphs and legal printouts. An auditor said, "These shell companies tie back to a family trust registered 20 years ago." Alex's jaw flexed. He said, "I consolidated assets I built." The auditor replied, "Or you appropriated what was never yours." Mike shifted, scanning the sheets like a surgeon over an open chest. The hum of the projector painted cold light across Alex's suit. "I do." Outside, the rain tapped Morse code against glass. Evelyn's old address surfaced on the paperwork like a ghost waving from the margins. Alex said it was survival. The lawyer across the table said it was control. Silence threaded itself between breaths, binding the moment tighter than the contracts. Mike's pen hovered above his notes, not moving. Alex thought of Grace's heartbeat, and the promise he couldn't afford to break. The pages lay between them like loaded weapons. Helena Quinn leaned back, her silver bob glinting under recessed lighting, voice smooth as polished stone. "Control is a loan, never a gift." Alex said, "You promised me time." Helena's eyes didn't blink. "Time is the only asset I can't extend." She slid a notice across the table with the grace of a blade. Mike watched from the corner, tension coiled. The paper's header read, "Vote of no confidence." Outside, the skyline gleamed with disinterest. Alex didn't reach for the document. His hands stayed folded, as if holding something invisible together. Helena's jade brooch caught the light, sharp green on deep navy. She said, "You can walk out or be walked out." Alex said, "You think this ends me?" She said, "I think it defines you." The clock ticked like applause muffled behind a curtain. Alex finally placed his hand on the paper, and the sound was louder than expected. The package was small, brown, unmarked, dangerously ordinary. Mike set it on the desk, knuckles drumming. No return address. Alex tore the tape and found a battered cassette labeled home in faded marker. Mike said, "Play it." Alex shook his head. Later. Why? Mike's voice sharpened. "Oh. Later is a liar." The player hissed. Then a child's voice, his own, spoke. "We won't be like him." Alex froze, every muscle listening. Evelyn's laughter leaked faintly in the background, like sunlight through a cracked door. Mike leaned back, eyes dark. "We were supposed to mean that." The tape clicked off, the room still holding the words. Alex stared at the player, the label, the impossible echo. He said, "I remember," but it sounded like he wished he didn't. The fox plush sat in the corner, a witness that would never testify. The desk light hummed on, oblivious. The elevator doors opened to the sub-basement archive. Rows of boxes whispered paper dust into the air. Mike said, "You shouldn't see this." Alex stepped past him, pulling a folder free. Inside, contracts signed by Cassian Vale years before the summit, detailing silent buy-ins, shadow acquisitions. Alex's breath hardened. He was inside before he arrived. Mike said nothing. The fluorescent overhead flickered once, catching Alex's face in a strobe of realization. The sound of water dripping somewhere far away marked time with surgical cruelty. Alex said, "You knew." Mike looked at the floor. "I knew he had leverage." The folder trembled in Alex's grip. Somewhere above, the storm pressed against the building, but here, the air didn't move. "Brother," Alex said, the word heavier than steel. Mike met his eyes for the first time, and in them sat a truth that had been waiting for years. Rain hammered the rooftop garden like an uninvited drumline. Cassian stood under a black umbrella, the city lights bleeding on his coat. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Alex stepped into the rain without cover. "You planned this from the start." Cassian's smile was a razor. Thin, precise. "No, I just knew which way you'd turn." Alex said, "You bought him." Cassian said, "He offered himself." The wind caught the umbrella, snapping it inside out. Cassian didn't flinch. Mike's name hung in the air between them, heavier than the storm. "You'll lose him," Alex said. Cassian's eyes softened with something almost like pity. "I never had him. Neither did you." Lightning framed them in white fire for half a heartbeat. The rain blurred the skyline into a smear of war paint. Somewhere a fox plush sat dry and forgotten. The boardroom was dressed for a coronation or an execution. No one knew which. The vote numbers glowed on the screen, red digits bleeding into the air. Helena said, "Shall we proceed?" Alex rose, buttoned his jacket as if sealing armor. Mike's eyes followed him like a shadow deciding whether to stay. Cassian leaned back, half smile waiting for the fall. Alex said, "This company was built with my blood, and I will not see it traded like currency at a bad market." Murmurs moved like wind through tall grass. The chairman's gavel hovered in the pause. Mike cleared his throat, but his words didn't come. Alex said, "Vote your conscience, if you can still find it." The gavel struck, the sound loud enough to shake dust from the crown molding. The result appeared, final and merciless. Alex didn't flinch, but something inside him stopped taking orders. Cassian's smile sharpened. Helena's didn't need to. The applause was polite, surgical, and final. In the hallway, victory and defeat mingled in the carpet fibers. Mike caught Alex's arm. "You could have fought harder." Alex said, "I fought exactly as hard as I could without losing more than the company." Mike's grip loosened. "We already lost it." Their footsteps were the only applause now. A secretary looked up, then down again, learning discretion. Alex said, "They'll strip it for parts." Mike said, "They'll strip you first." The elevator arrived with a chime too cheerful for the moment. Alex stepped in, rainwater still clinging to his shoulders from the rooftop hours earlier. The doors closed, cutting off Mike's silhouette like a severed sentence. Inside, Alex's reflection in the mirrored wall looked like a stranger trying on his skin. The numbers above the door climbed, but felt like they were counting something else entirely. Claire's laugh smelled like rain and unfinished art. Alex stood at the doorway, holding Grace's fox plush like a passport to somewhere better. Claire said, "You look like someone who stayed too long at the wrong table." Alex said, "I walked away before they could burn it down." Grace emerged from her room, eyes wide. "Did you win?" Alex knelt. "I kept what matters." Grace took the plush, inspected it, then hugged him. Claire watched, arms folded but softer now. "What happens next?" Alex said, "We start from zero. I've done it before." Grace said, "Zero is where you draw the first line." The storm outside thinned, the city lights steady for once. Alex felt the air loosen around him just enough to breathe. Mike sat at the bar, nursing something amber that hadn't earned the name whiskey yet. Cassian slid onto the stool beside him. "You did well." Mike didn't look at him. "I did what I thought was right." Cassian said, "Right is just the side with better paperwork." Mike's reflection in the mirror looked older than the man drinking. Cassian said, "You're free now." Mike said, "From what?" The bartender wiped down the counter. pretending to polish glass but listening to every word. Outside, a cab's headlights painted the bottles gold for a second before disappearing. Cassian lifted his glass. To brothers, bound or broken. Mike clinked without smiling. The city skyline stretched under a sky, rinsed clean. Alex stood alone on the pedestrian bridge, the tower he once ruled now, just another light in the distance. Grace's voice from the phone in his pocket said, "Are you coming home?" He smiled without being seen. "I'm already on my way." The hum of traffic below was steady, like a heartbeat that had decided to keep going. Alex touched the railing, the metal cool and grounding. The fox plush was tucked under his arm, absurd and perfect. He didn't need the title, the office, or the vote. The empire could burn. The only thing worth keeping was still his. He crossed the bridge, step by deliberate step, into a future with fewer floors but better rooms. The apartment was quieter than Alex remembered, as if walls could mourn. He unpacked a cardboard box marked office, setting down awards that no longer meant victory. Grace padded in, bare feet soft on the floor. "Is this where you work now?" she asked. Alex smiled faintly. "For now." Claire appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands, reading his face. "You came back with less than you left with," Alex said, "but enough to start again." Grace placed the fox plush on the desk like a good luck charm. The late afternoon sun slanted through blinds, striping the room in gold and shadow. Alex touched the plush, then the keyboard, feeling both like anchors. The world outside kept moving, but for the first time in months, it wasn't pulling him with it. The cafe smelled of burnt espresso and fresh plans. Mike sat across from Alex, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. "You're still angry," Alex said. Mike shrugged. "You're still my brother." The pause held more history than the words. Outside, pedestrians hurried past rain-streaked windows, unaware of empires lost or rebuilt. Alex leaned in. "I'm starting something new." Mike's brow lifted. "Without me?" Alex shook his head. "Only if you choose not to be there." A smile almost cracked Mike's face. "What's the pitch?" Alex slid a napkin across the table with a few messy sketches. The ink bled slightly where a drop of water had fallen, like the plan already knew it would weather storms. Claire's studio was alive with color. Canvases leaned against every wall, each telling a story Alex didn't know. She stood at the easel, brush in hand, not turning when he entered. "You left it all behind," she said. "I brought what mattered," he replied. She glanced over her shoulder, eyes soft but measuring. "And what's that?" He pointed to Grace, sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing. Claire's lips curved. "Then you did the right thing." Sunlight spilled through high windows, catching paint dust in the air. Alex took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the smell of turpentine and possibility. The past was still there, but it had stopped shouting. At the hospital, Grace walked slowly down the corridor, fox plush in hand. Alex followed, matching her pace. The doctor approached with a small, hopeful smile. "The latest tests look promising." Claire exhaled, her hand finding Alex. Grace looked up at both of them. "Does that mean I can run again?" The doctor nodded. "Soon." Grace grinned, clutching the plush like it had been her medicine all along. The sterile white walls seemed less cold in that moment. Alex knelt, hugging her. "We have so much to do," he whispered. And for once, the future felt lighter than the past. The bridge was quieter at night, only the river below speaking. Alex stood with Mike, leaning on the rail. The skyline shimmered in the distance, the tower they'd built together now just another silhouette. "We were never meant to keep it," Mike said. Alex smiled faintly. "No, but we were meant to build it." The river carried the reflection of the city downstream, breaking it into pieces of light. Mike said, "What's next?" Alex answered, "Something we can finish without losing ourselves." They stood in silence, the wind tugging at their jackets, the city waiting for the next story. The community hall smelled faintly of sawdust and fresh coffee. Folding tables held sketches, prototypes, and the kind of ideas that start with pencil lines before they own skylines. Alex walked through, greeting volunteers like old allies. Grace darted ahead, fox plush tucked under her arm, showing her drawings to anyone who'd look. Claire leaned against the wall, watching him as if weighing this version of him against every other. Mike arrived late, a laptop under one arm, eyes scanning the room. "Looks like you're serious," he said. Alex replied, "I was always serious. Now I'm just free." Laughter sparked between old friends and strangers as light streamed through high windows. Outside, the world kept its noise. Inside, something new was learning to speak. The riverbank was quiet, the grass still damp from last night's rain. Alex sat beside Grace, their shoes off, toes in the cold water. "Do you miss it?" she asked. He thought about the tower, the votes, the skyline at night. "Some days," he said. She skipped a stone, watching it bounce twice before sinking. "But not most days." He smiled. "Not most days." Claire's voice called from up the hill, telling them lunch was ready. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. The current moved past them, unbothered by what it left behind. Alex dipped his hand in the water, feeling the weight slide away. Mike's apartment smelled like cardboard and ambition. Boxes lined the walls, half packed, half forgotten. "You leaving?" Alex asked. Mike shrugged. "Starting something new." He tossed a file onto the table. Business plan scribbled with the same restless handwriting Alex knew from their first venture. "You want in?" Mike said. Alex grinned. "Only if I get to argue about everything." Mike laughed, shaking his head. "Wouldn't be us otherwise." The window behind them framed the skyline, the tower barely visible. Neither man looked at it. The workshop smelled of sawdust and solder. Alex guided Grace's hands as she fit a small gear into place on her project. "Like this?" she asked. "Perfect," he said, tightening the final screw. Mike was at another table, showing a group of teenagers how to wire a simple motor. Claire took photos, the fox plush sitting on the edge of the workbench as if supervising. Outside, rain began tapping on the metal roof, but inside, the sound was a steady heartbeat. Tools clinked, voices rose and fell, and the air felt thick with futures being built in miniature. The pedestrian bridge at night hummed under Alex's steps. Fireworks bloomed over the city in the distance, their reflection trembling in the river below. Grace stood beside him, holding the fox plush, eyes wide at the sky. Claire joined them, her hand slipping into his. Mike appeared on his other side, silent but steady. Alex watched the skyline. Once a crown, now just lights, and felt no pull to go back. Grace whispered, "This is better." He nodded, the words he'd been carrying for months finally forming. He left the company, but he never left her. The fireworks roared, and the night held its breath.